canna say when the first whisper began. It was quiet at first, a small thought I could easily ignore. Migh Faldur, our home carved deep within the Blue Mountains. It stood as a testament to dwarven resilience. For centuries we had thrived here, the last great city of dwarves, with tunnels stretching out like the veins of a living creature. Yet, in the past few months, something had changed. It started innocuously enough, a dream perhaps, a fleeting thought about digging in the old warrens, a place no one spoke of, and even fewer dared visit. The old warrens were shut off long before I was born, sealed with a heavy iron gate and bricked over, as if the stone itself needed protection from what lay beyond. The council's orders were clear. No dwarf was to set foot there. At first, I thought I could shake it off, but then I noticed the others. Oric, my oldest friend, and Doric, a blacksmith. I caught them looking at me with that same distant, haunted look. I recognized it because it mirrored my own, and soon the digging began. It was secret work, hidden from the eyes of the council. The old warrens were forbidden, sealed off after rumors of accidents, collapses, and something worse. The story spoke of voices in the dark, of miners who disappeared without a trace. Some said the tunnels were cursed, that the mountain itself wanted them shut away forever. But the pull, it was too strong. At first we gathered at night, slipping past the gates when the city was asleep. There were only a few of us at first. Oric, Duric, a handful of others. We made a pact to keep it quiet, to tell no one of our intentions. We met in hushed tones, discussing the work like conspirators, knowing full well the consequences if we were caught. I remember the first night I set foot in the old warrens. The air was different there, stale, cold, as if the stone itself had forgotten how to breathe. The tunnels were narrow, winding like the roots of a great tree, and the deeper we went, the more the whispers grew. At first they were faint, like distant voices carried on the wind, but as we dug, they grew louder. The others felt it too. Oric, with his broad shoulders and thick beard, worked tirelessly, his pickaxe swinging in steady, rhythmic strokes. Duric, always the quiet one, kept his eyes fixed on the stone, muttering to himself as he chipped away at the ancient rock. Weeks passed. Our secret meetings became a nightly routine, each of us consumed by the same gnawing desire to dig deeper, to uncover what lay hidden in the depths of the old warrens. We barely spoke, our conversations reduced to grunts and nods. The sound of steel against stone became a maddening rhythm, echoing through the tunnels. We were careful to cover our tracks, filling in sections of the tunnel behind us to keep the council from discovering our work. But the deeper we dug, the more reckless we became. The whispers had taken hold of us, twisting our thoughts, feeding our obsession. There was no turning back. It wasn't long before the council started noticing the changes in us. Councilman Yulmer was the first to confront me. He caught me one evening as I was leaving the forge, his stern face illuminated by the flickering glow of the forges. "You've been absent, Baylor," he said, his voice low but firm. "Working late nights, I hear. I know you've been going to the old Warrens." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I kept my expression neutral. "Just routine maintenance," I lied. "Nothing more. The tunnels are safe." Yulmer's eyes narrowed. "Safe? Those tunnels are cursed, and you know it. I've heard the rumors, Balor. You and the others. Auric, Durek. What are y'all up to?" For a moment, I considered telling him the truth. The whispers had become too loud, too insistent. But then I remembered the others. We had made a pact, sworn to keep our work secret. I couldn't betray them. We're just doing what we have to," I said. "There's nothing more to it." Yulmer stared at me for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "Be careful where you dig, Balor," he said finally. "The mountain holds many secrets. Not all of them should be uncovered." His warning lingered in my mind long after he left, but I shoved it aside. We were close. I could feel it. The digging consumed us. We no longer cared about food, rest, about anything but the stone. Every strike of the pickaxe felt like a heartbeat, a pulse beneath the earth drawing us closer to something. It was Auric who noticed first that Councilman Yulmer had begun watching us. He followed us into the tunnels one night, claiming it was for an inspection. His eyes were too keen, too curious. Auric pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent. "He knows," Auric said, his face grim. "He's been watching us. We need to do something before he reports us to the council." I hesitated. "Do something? What are you suggesting?" Auric's eyes darkened. "We silence him. If the council finds out what we've been doing, they'll stop us. You know that as well as I do." The thought of murder made my stomach churn, but Auric was right. The whispers had taken root too deeply. The stone had claimed us. There was no turning back now. That night, we lured Councilman Yulmer into the depths of the old Warrens. He followed us willingly, trusting us, never suspecting what was to come. When we reached the farthest chamber, Auric struck first. His pickaxe buried itself in Yulmer's side, and the councilman crumpled to the ground, gasping in shock. Before he could cry out, I grabbed his arm, pulling him down. As the others joined in, their tools flashed in the dim light, the sound of metal against flesh filling the air. When it was over, we stood in silence, staring down at the lifeless body of the councilman. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling. I'd never killed a man before. "We have to hide him," Auric said, his voice cold. "No one can know." We buried Yulmer's body in one of the collapsed tunnels, covering the grave with loose stones. As we worked, I could feel the whispers growing louder, more insistent. They were pleased. After that night, everything changed. The weight of what we had done hung over us like a shroud, but the whispers, they had grown stronger. They no longer needed to be coaxed or sought out. They invaded my thoughts unbidden, weaving through my dreams, calling to me even in the quiet moments of the day. And I wasn't the only one. Auric had begun to speak in fragmented sentences, muttering to himself, as if in conversation with something invisible. The others, too, were faring no better. Durek, once a rock of reliability, had grown jittery and paranoid. I caught him once, staring into the blackness of the tunnels, whispering something under his breath. "They're watching us," he said when I asked him what was wrong. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow. The mountain sees us. Thorin, another of our group, hadn't slept in days. His face was gaunt, his beard unkempt. He was often the last to leave the tunnels, scratching away at the stone long after the others had gone. His hands were blistered, his eyes wide with a madness I could recognize, because I felt it creeping into my own mind. We were all unraveling. The whispers were pulling us apart. We couldn't hide our activities forever. Ylmer's disappearance hadn't gone unnoticed. The council grew suspicious, sending patrols to investigate the old warrens. One evening, as we gathered to begin our nightly work, we heard footsteps echoing through the tunnel. Torches flickered in the distance, and the sound of voices grew louder. "Council patrol!" Oric hissed, his face pale. We scrambled to hide our tools, shoving them into the shadows as the patrol approached. I held my breath, praying they would pass by without noticing us. But they didn't. The patrol leader, a dwarf named Rurik, stepped into the chamber, his eyes narrowing as he spotted us. "What are you doing down here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "These tunnels are off limits." Oric stepped forward, his face a mask of calm. "Just inspecting for collapses," he said smoothly. "Nothing more." Rurik didn't look convinced, his gaze flickering to the pickaxes lying near the tunnel wall, the fresh scratches on the stone. He took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You've been digging," Rurik said, his voice edged with suspicion. "This is against council orders." I felt a surge of pain rise in my chest. We had been caught. All the work, all the blood we had spilled to keep this secret was about to be undone by a single patrol. Oric's eyes flicked to mine. A silent understanding passed between us. There was no other choice. The whispers thrummed in my skull, urging me forward. Before Rurik could draw his sword, Oric moved. He lunged at the patrol leader, his hands grabbing the hilt of Rurik's weapon, twisting it free before the dwarf could react. The other patrol members shouted in alarm, reaching for their own weapons. But we were faster. Desperation and madness had given us an edge, and we struck with ruthless efficiency. I grabbed a torch from the wall and swung it towards one of the patrolmen, the flame catching his beard and setting it alight. He screamed, stumbling backwards as he tried to extinguish the fire, giving me enough time to bring my pickaxe down on his head. With a sickening crunch, blood splattered across the stone floor, mixing with the soot and dust. The others moved in a frenzy. Oric, with brutal precision, drove his pickaxe into Rurik's chest, silencing him forever. Thorin, wide-eyed and twitching, tackled another guard, slamming his head repeatedly into the stone until there was nothing left but a bloody smear. In minutes it was over. The patrol lay dead at our feet, their bodies broken and bloodied. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling as I looked down at the carnage. What had we become? "They would have stopped us," Oric said, his voice shaking as he wiped the blood from his pickaxe. "They would have shut us down, and we're so close." I nodded, though my stomach churned with revulsion. We had no choice now. The council would notice the missing patrol soon enough. We had to work faster. "We bury them," I said, my voice hollow. "We bury them, and we finish what we started." The bodies of the patrol were hidden in a collapsed shaft, just as we had done with Councilman Ylmer. The act of burying them felt disturbingly easy. as if we were simply clearing rubble from our path. The whispers were louder now, always in the back of my mind, a constant droning that urged us deeper. The others grew more frantic. Auric had stopped sleeping entirely, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. Durek rarely spoke anymore, his gaze distant, lost to whatever madness had taken root in his mind. Thorin was barely recognizable. His hands were raw from digging, his nails cracked and bleeding. He muttered constantly, his words slurred and incomprehensible. And then one night, we broke through. The tunnel we had been digging led us to a massive cavern, the air thick with an ancient, musty smell. The stone walls were carved with strange, intricate runes, unlike anything we had ever seen. They pulsed faintly with a sickly green light, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. At the center of the room stood a monolith, an enormous black stone that seemed to swallow the light around it. The moment we laid eyes on it, the whispers stopped. For the first time in months, there was silence. We stared at the monolith, unsure of what to do next. The pull we had felt, the insatiable urge to dig had led us here. But now that we were standing before it, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Auric was the first to move. He approached the monolith cautiously, his hands outstretched. This is it, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. This is what we've been searching for. He placed his hand on the stone, and then everything went wrong. The moment Auric touched the monolith, the runes on the walls flared to life, glowing with an intense light. The ground beneath us shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the cavern. The stone pulsed beneath Auric's hand, and I watched in horror as his body began to wither. Auric screamed, his voice filled with agony as the life was drained from him. His skin shriveled, his flesh turning gray and brittle, as if all the moisture in his body was being sucked out. His eyes rolled back into his head, and within moments he collapsed to the ground, a hollow, lifeless husk. The others screamed and scrambled backwards, but it was too late. The monolith had awoken something ancient and terrible. The whispers returned, but they were no longer just voices in our head. They were everywhere, echoing off the walls, filling the air with a palpable sense of malice. And then I felt it, a presence. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. Something was here, something that had been trapped within the stone, trapped for untold centuries, and now it was free. A shadow began to form around the monolith, swirling and coiling like smoke. It took shape, a towering figure with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. Its voice was guttural, rasping, a sound that resonated deep in my bones. Free, it hissed, its gaze locking onto me. At long last, I am free. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The others had already fled, their screams echoing down the tunnels as they ran for their lives. But I couldn't run. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear as the shadow loomed over me. And then it reached out. I felt the cold, icy tendrils of its presence wrap around my mind, and I screamed. The pain was indescribable. as if my very soul was being torn apart. The shadows invaded my thoughts, my memories, every part of me. I was being consumed, devoured by this ancient evil that we had so foolishly unleashed. But as the pain intensified, something else began to happen. I could feel my consciousness slipping away. But it wasn't death. No, this was something worse. I was still there, still aware, but I was no longer in control. The spirit had taken hold of me, possessed me. I wasn't Balor anymore. I was something else. When I finally regained some semblance of awareness, I was standing at the entrance to the old warrens, covered in dirt and blood. My hands trembled as I looked down at them, at the bodies of my friends scattered around me. Auric, Durrick, Thorin. They were all dead, their bodies twisted and broken. I didn't remember killing them, but I knew I had. The spirit inside of me had taken control, had used me to slaughter the others and complete its release. I stumbled out of the tunnels, my heart pounding in my chest. The city of Migh Faldur lay ahead, its towering gates welcoming me back. It wasn't a homecoming. I could feel the spirit stirring within me, hungering for more. I had to get out. I had to leave before the council discovered what had happened, before the spirit could spread its corruption any further. With what little strength I had left, I fled Migh Faldur, disappearing into the wilderness beyond the Blue Mountains. The whispers followed me, always in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the evil I had unleashed. And now, as I wander the world, I know one thing for certain. The spirit is patient. It's waiting, biding its time. And when it's ready, it'll strike again. Because I'm not just a dwarf anymore. I'm a vessel for something far worse. Something that cannot be stopped.